All right, so the tripartite soul. This is a vision understanding of the soul that Socrates describes in the Republic. And essentially, it goes like this. So, we have, it's called tripartite because it's three parts. So his idea is that the soul is divided into three parts. Now, the Greeks in general believed that all living things have a soul. And the soul is equated with motion. So the word for soul is this word in Greek, psyche, approximately, which means, it means soul, but also in English it can mean mind. And so we could almost think of the soul to the Greeks as mind, and if you're thinking in terms of Judeo-Christian concept of soul and afterlife and stuff, I mean, that's true as well, but it's maybe akin to like living force. And it also had a lot to do with motion. And so motion, and motion includes the ability to change to the Greeks, is what made something alive. Hence, like animus is the Latin word for soul, and that's also the word we get for animation and all that kind of stuff. So life, soul, motion all kind of go together. Now, all living things have at least what he calls an appetitive soul. Okay, and so your appetites are basically what you need to live, right? So appetites include hunger and thirst and that kind of stuff. I'll come back. I'm going to set this up and then I'll come back to them as we go. Then some living things have an emotional or spirited aspect to their souls. And then some things have a rational aspect. Okay. Now, the deal is that all living things have appetites. Now, the appetites would include anything that you desire in order to stay alive. So obviously, I mean, we think of appetite for the most part in terms of eating, right? You know, bon appetit kind of thing. But that also would include any desire you have for thirst, even for shelter, procreation, all that kind of stuff. So the appetites are geared to a living thing having the desires, and you have to put desire kind of in quotations, having the ability to get what it needs to survive. All living things need things to survive. So if you take, a single-celled organism, a protozoa, you take grass, you take a flower, whatever, a person, a dog, a monkey, all of these things need things to survive, right? So even grass, in a way, has, appetite. It's just that it can't act on having its appetites met in the way that other things can, but still, grass does suck, water out of the soil and stuff like that. So that's what we mean by the appetitive. Now, the emotions or spirit, you'll notice the root word, right? Emotion. And so here we're talking about sentient things. And so by sentient things, what we mean is animals. And so these are things that have a central nervous system, essentially. And so the difference between a plant and an animal is that animals do have what we call emotions in the human sense, but perhaps a little bit less refined. So as a quick example, you could think of, if you have a dog, right? The dog will be happy, the dog will be sad. I mean, you are angry and, scared, whatever. You can read the emotions of your dog. Now, that's in a kind of higher level of sentient thing, but you could even think of earthworms. I mean, they do have the ability, earthworms, to move, right? And so when an earthworm feels water in its hole, right, it has a central nervous system that allows it to react and to move itself, basically. And so it can exit its hole kind of thing. So all living things have appetites. Some living things have the ability to move, and so that's spirit. In other words, this involves the choice of locomotion, basically. Okay. Then some things have all of these types of soul, plus the ability to use reason, and that's us, human beings. And so by rational, we mean logical and all that kind of stuff. Okay, now, how this applies to the way we live. So, if you really drew this to scale, what you'd probably find is that most people are very appetitive. And so let's see. The appetites, as they sort of manifest themselves in human behavior, are largely about wealth and pleasure. Now, all living things need, for instance, food to survive, right? However, human beings like to turn eating into an art, and so we have cuisine and all that kind of stuff, right? And use spices and whatnot. You know, animals don't, and surely plants don't. Plants don't even eat, right? They just suck the minerals and water from soil. Now, as the human being works, however, we don't want just what we need to survive. We want wealth. In other words, we want, stuff. And the reason we want wealth is because it brings us pleasure, right? So you don't want just a tent. You want a nice house. You don't just want, clothes that keep you warm. You want fashionable clothes. I mean, that kind of stuff. So wealth and pleasure kind of go together. Now, the way he understood spirit is about the life of honor. In other words, what he means by honor is status. And so the part of the soul that deals with, that houses the emotions, is geared toward motivating people to think about things like status and popularity and that kind of stuff. And honor in the sense of being honored. In other words, not like duty, honor, country kind of concept, but rather having the honors and awards and accolades of people. And then lastly is the rational part of the soul, and this is basically the logical one. This is where wisdom, knowledge, that kind of stuff comes from. So what separates us from the animals, though, is this rational part. So in other words, yes, we do have appetites like all living things. However, the more interested we are in things like pleasure, take something like procreation. All living things procreate. Plants do so asexually. Most animals do so sexually. And humans do so constantly, right? This is the thing. We could have sex simply for procreation, like animals that have mating seasons, or plants that just, don't even know that they're doing it. Or we could do it for pleasure and do it constantly. Drinking, for instance. Yes, we all need to drink, right? And so we have the appetite for drink. But the pleasure aspect would include, nice scotches and beers and that sort of thing. So we share this with all animals, or all living things. And indeed, we also share our emotions with a lot of living things, animals, right? And so, in other words, the appetites are not unique to human beings. All living things have them. But likewise, emotions are not unique to human beings because even animals have them. And so the only thing that is actually unique to us is reason, the power of logic. So in other words, where he's going with this is, if we want to live a truly human life, we must ultimately act rationally at all times. If we allow our appetites to rule us, and we are more about pleasure and the gaining of wealth, then we act like plants, essentially. If we're more inclined to a life of status and honor, and spirit and passion is another good one here we could put. So the life of passion, again, is not a uniquely human life. It's the life of animal. The only thing that is uniquely human is this top part of the soul, which only human beings have, and that's reason. So we have these other aspects to us, but they're not ultimately human. They are not our nature. So if we act on passion or if we act on appetite, it's as if we are not acting on what our nature is. It would be like trying to use, a knife to pound in a nail. A hammer is a hammer, and it has a certain purpose and a certain function based on what it is. And its nature is such that it pounds nails. Human beings, our nature is rational. Therefore, we should rein in and limit these other aspects of us, because that's not unique to what we are. Indeed, a hammer and a knife could be both made of metal, but you're not going to pound in nails with a knife, because though it possesses metal, the metal alone doesn't make the hammer. It's the shape, it's the purpose, etc. So in the same way, you might have appetites and emotions, but that doesn't necessarily make what you are. Because ultimately, to Socrates and Plato, you are rational. That's what is human about us. Reason. So the tripartite soul tells us, we have these baser elements, like these lower elements, and they are part of being human, but reason and the rational soul is what we are, and that makes us human. Therefore, where he's going with this ultimately is, if we want to make good choices and we want to be what we are, we must be at all times logical. At least as logical as we can be.